Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Grand Cathay in Total War Warhammer 3 for Realms of Chaos, Immortal Empires, and most recently the Old World Custom Campaign mod, which does provide for a fairly interesting campaign. You can play as Yan Bo by default in the Old World mod, though there's also another mod, the Mod Configuration Tool, which would allow you to play as Yao Ming or Miao Ying in this map. So if you don't Shadows of Change, you can still play as Cathay in this map. Cathay is a good race, though certainly not a great race. It's not an S tier race, like say the Greenskins or Dark Elves or some others, but it is still a fairly good race. So in this video, I want to cover what makes them a good race and areas where they can be improved. Now, to be clear, Yan Bo is an S tier legendary lord. He's one of the most powerful in the game. He does have a pretty fun playstyle. Matters of state just make him absolutely ridiculous. But for Cathay as a whole, there are certainly some shortcomings, but overall, the race is in a good position. There are just some things that can be improved. Now, I'm making this video because there has been speculation, rumors flying around that maybe Creative Assembly will add more content and more changes to the Shadows of Change DLC. I guess we'll have to wait and see on that if they do decide to make it, or if it's just a bunch of rumors and speculation. Now, it would be very nice if they did it, make Shadows of Change more worthwhile. I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath on that subject. Now, one of the things they have changed with patch 4.1 as opposed to 4.0. So 4.0 overhauled the harmony system. 4.1 made changes to it. So we went from global harmony to localized provincial harmony. And then people complained on Reddit and other places that, oh, there's no negatives to going full yin or yang. So they added negatives to it. This was done under the pretense that without negatives, you would always go down one particular path and there wasn't necessarily much choice in it or consequence. Like there were people talking about consequence. Well, consequence was not having the benefits from the other side. Like if you went yang, yeah, you would get the recruitment benefits, but you wouldn't have the income benefit, upkeep benefit, movement speed benefit, movement range benefit, and you would also lose on the growth, construction cost control, and construction time benefits. There were plenty of reasons to go either yin, yang, or harmony. With the negatives added, basically, balanced harmony is the only way to go. So, good job on that, Creative Assembly and Reddit. You screwed the pooch, so to speak. You fucked up. Like, this is one of the things I dislike about, people giving that kind of feedback on Reddit and then Creative Assembly saying, oh, that's a great idea. Now, maybe Creative Assembly always intended to add negatives and they just never got around to it before Shadows of Change came out. That could certainly be the case, or maybe they were just responding to popular feedback. Given some of the other changes they made in 4.1, like the increased HP on walls, the once button reset skill that they added, sure, modified based on what the mod modified based on the mod, because like in the mod you can only do it once and it costs 1,000 gold. Here you just wound your lord for 3 turns. So some differences, but clearly based on community feedback, quotation marks. The problem is community feedback is not necessarily always correct. But enough of the harmony system. I've already talked about that in a previous video. What makes Cathay great? What are some of the things that aren't so great and could use improvements, and what could they have added to their roster? So let's first talk about the economy, because economy is quite important. Cathay's economy is fairly solid. The structures aren't really too expensive, so 500 for a basic economic structure going all the way to 1,500. This is a pretty solid ratio. It's not as cheap as, say, Greenskins who get away with like 250 for 250 at tier 1, but certainly a pretty solid ratio. And it does go up, and you are also earning trade tariffs. This is with the yin structure. With the yang, you go to 325 from 150. So it's 100. So it's kind of going to be. It was pretty similar before. Like, basically before, there was never any reason to go with the Yang building. Now there's reason. You would need a lot of trade agreements to make the trade tariff benefit. I think, like, you need probably, like, 20 trade agreements to make the trade tariff benefit worth it. Unless you're playing on Bo, then you have a different dynamic because of matters of state to concern the campaign. But by default, yeah, the Yang building is going to generate more money unless you have a ridiculous amount of trade agreements to work with. But Cathay's economy, buildings are at a reasonable price, not too cheap, but also not too expensive. Their economy can maintain the number of units. Crucially, when it comes to their economy, their basic units like Jade Warriors and Peasants, they're not too expensive, not too cheap. So Cathay can maintain certainly a good number of units, can maintain a good number of armies in their campaign without too many issues. You won't be swimming in money as, say, some other races, but you certainly won't be running out of money either. You're not going to struggle financially, but you just won't have, say, this kind of tactical and strategic flexibility that the Greenskins, Dark Elves, and a few others do have on the campaign map. Hell, the Skaven will outpace you in terms of your overall economy, though the Skaven have their own caveats. You also have to consider that, economically speaking, you have to consider the administration center or the lumber mill and the benefits that these provide, and then, of course, yin and yang, or balanced harmony. Then there's also the compass itself. I don't like the problem with the compass. Yes, there are some economic benefits, but basically, if you're playing Cathay, you almost always want to have that as much casualty replenishment as possible, because the compass is the only thing that gives you casualty replenishment. And if you have enough casualty replenishment, let's say they were adding a hero for casualty replenishment, the problem that would create with the compass is there would basically be no reason to go with anything other than Celestial Lake and the 15% economic benefit that you get with that. Sure, there would be some benefits with the Dongchang Basin if you're constructing a lot of buildings, but this is specific for Hyunbo. So with the baseline compass options, like if you don't have casualty replenishment, you go for Great Bastion. If you have it, if you were to potentially get it for some updated research or a new hero or some new Lord Skelline or something like that, you would always go with Celestial Lake. It's the same kind of bad dynamic that exists with the invocations that Kislev has in their campaigns with Devotion. That's one of the problems, because like basically when you're building supporters as Kislev, you always want to go for Urson, but if you don't care about supporters, let's say Boris Ursus, you always want to go for Dash. By the way, that invocation for economic benefit is why Boris Ursus is better than Astankia, because yeah, Astankia has really powerful individual armies. Boris Ursus maintains a lot more armies than she does, and it's not even close to that. I mean, it might just be, let's say, a quarter more armies or something like that, or a fifth more armies, but that does count in a campaign far more so than you think. Scalability of economy is actually quite important. It's a good thing that Cathay does have that. Now, in other ways, that Cathay is great as a race, especially with Shadows of Change. You now have the Lord Magistrate, who gives you who actually is useful right now. The reason he's actually useful is he can reduce the upkeep of your army by 15% and give 20% more ammunition. So while his combat capability is not going to be that great, he is going to be a good army buffer, a good army leader from that perspective alone. And then, of course, you get something like the Celestial General for a powerful melee lord that can do quite well in a fight. And, of course, the Dragon-Blooded, a decent caster lord, not too great, but to be honest, the caster lord right now kind of feels meaningless with Shadows of Change. Like before, the caster lord was the best choice, right? Because the Lord Magistrate just wasn't really that useful, but now he's got a flying mount, so he might be more useful, and you're going to have an abundance of casters as Cathay. Individual unit selection. At tier 1, you can, from any settlement, you can get Peasant Archers and Peasant Long Spearmen. I don't think the Long Spears are worth it in any way, shape, or form. However, Peasant Archers are certainly decent enough units for a starting unit. Their range and damage and just overall stats are certainly put them in a comparable state to something like Archers of the Empire or, say, Goblin Archers for the Greenskins. Though Goblin Archers for the Greenskins will typically be much better because of the upgrades. Obviously, Kossars are better units. It's a stats question. But yeah, these guys are decent enough as archers, but that's not... range capability is something like you're going to get fairly easily as Cathay once you get to tier 2. From a tier 1 barracks, you do have the Jade Warriors, and I love these guys. They're very, very durable. Great leadership, high levels of armor, bronze shields. These guys will hold the line very well. I don't really use much of their formation attack, but these guys are pretty damn powerful. Their damage capability isn't particularly great, but in terms of line holders, yes, these guys are probably one of the best tier 1 units in the entire game. They don't have any kind of anti-large capability, but in an infantry clash, they're going to do quite well. And hell, even against cavalry, they would do quite well against holding impact cavalry. They just wouldn't be able to kill it as a unit of spearmen. Though, to be honest, I probably, when it comes to a charge of Bretonnian cavalry, for instance, against a unit, I'd probably put my money on the Jade Warriors as the Peasant Long Spears. Though there is an upgrade available fairly early on that does give them 10 armor, so who knows, maybe that is useful. Though I typically don't, like, you'll always get it because it unlocks further stuff down the research tree, but I generally don't bother with the peasants, unless I literally have no choice, and then I usually get Peasant Archers anyway. At tier 2, which has changed? We got the Onyx Crowman. These are basically Cathayan Harpies. Not that great. And I guess for multiplayer maybe, and they do have the ability of fearing, but yeah, they're just not that great. They're very squishy units. And also, they cost quite a bit to maintain, so 165 upkeep is nothing to sneeze at. These are the most expensive units you can maintain at tier 2. They're just not a worthwhile unit. Maybe some flanking capability, harassing capability, but otherwise not really. You want to get Jade Warrior Crossbowman. Really good unit, good amount of armor piercing, good amount of range, good amount of armor. Like, one of the things that separates Cathayan ranged units or Cathayan units from others is not really their damage dealing capabilities, but their sheer survivability. Archers with 80 armor at tier 2 is incredibly powerful to have in any campaign. I think these guys are some of the most survivable range units in the game. Obviously, dwarves also have quarrelers, and quarrelers generally are going to be better. But we have to keep in mind that dwarves have many other issues that do prevent them from reaching their full potential. Cathay is just in an overall better situation than dwarves. Like, basically, Cathay is one of the best, if not the best order factions in the entire game. I mean, yeah, you have high elves with their extra range and powerful legendary lords and so on and so forth, but Cathay is quite capable of fighting the high elves. They don't quite have some of the crazy benefits the high elves have, especially later on in the game, but early game, yeah, can't complain about Jade Warrior Crossbowman. If there's any particular complaint, is that you get the tier 3 Jade Warrior Crossbowman with shields, which is basically the same unit, that the only difference is you just get the silver shield, bronze shield. Yeah, it would kind of be great to be able to upgrade between these units. Like, I don't know why Warriors of Chaos should be the only race that has that kind of system of upgrade. In Attila, of all the games that I can mention, and I hate Attila, in Attila, we had the ability of retraining units. Maybe we should get that for at least some of these kind of units where it makes sense. And same with Jade Warriors, because we get the Halberdiers. They lose the bronze shield, but they get a significant amount of damage increase because most of their damage is going to be armor piercing, and we're going to get the bonus versus large. That is pretty significant. The entire Cathayan infantry tree from their basic barracks produces really good units that you can use throughout the entire campaign, and that's not all. Cavalry-wise, their peasant horsemen aren't that great, but the Jade Lancers, these guys can fight any other early game cavalry in the game. And while the Great Longmont Riders aren't necessarily too special, there are some sacrifices that need to be made. The flexibility these guys give you on the battlefield, combined with their high charge bonus and armor, makes them pretty useful, especially in sieges when you just want to create openings or attack artillery in a walled settlement. These guys can be pretty sweet. Though you can skip past the cavalry line, it's not necessarily too big of an issue. There are other options Cathay has. Iron Hail Gunners, pretty decent, pretty solid damage, but at very short range, so there's a sacrifice. A couple of these can be pretty useful in an army, but you can also live without them in this entire build chain until you get to tier 3. That's when you get great cannons. That's when you get crane gunners as a sniper unit in a similar fashion to Jezzail's. And, of course, the war drum for some buffs. I don't necessarily care much about the war drum from Shadows of Change, but certainly crane gunners and great grand cannons at tier 3 are pretty useful. Imagine if the Empire got great cannons at tier 3. Wouldn't that be a nice change? And then you get fire rain rockets at tier 4. Not much more to say, really. Hellstorm rocket batteries, not quite as good in some ways, but still quite a very powerful unit. And besides, you get flying Hellstorm rocket batteries later on in your campaign. Then you have the Celestial Dragon Guard and Dragon Crossbowmen, just basically improved versions of the Jade Warriors, much improved in a lot of ways, much more in terms of combat capability, more armor, more survivability, more damage. So yeah, Celestial Dragon Crossbowmen might be one of the best range units in the entire game, certainly one of the most capable range units in the entire game. Not necessarily the longest range, but certainly a good amount of damage, good amount of armor, bronze shields, pretty effective, like the ultimate crossbowman in the game. I mean, you could talk about Takshina all you want, but I mean, I think Celestial Dragon crossbows would beat Takshina in a one-on-one fight. Though, to be fair, like, believe it or not, Akshina do have some drawbacks. Armor, for instance, and Celestial Dragon crossbows are better in that respect. And they also have two shots per volley, which is certainly a significant benefit for them. Though you do require tier 5 to get them, which is a drawback. Let's not ignore that. Then we have the Celestial Tower ending up in a Terracotta Sentinel. The Whooshing Compass is useless, but the Astromancers, which you can increase in capacity at tier 4, as well as the Jade Ninja Alliance, giving you some decent enough monstrous units in your Cathayan roster, giving you some extra flexibility on the battlefield. Because like Cathay's playstyle can be fairly static, and while the cavalry is decent, it doesn't necessarily help them. The monster units they have does absolutely help them with Shadows of Change. And then we finally have the Alchemist Tower. We get Alchemist, pretty good hero, good magic, and we get the Sky Junk. The Sky Lantern, not so worth it. The Sky Junk, absolutely, especially because of the control you have. And you know what? It's great in settlement battles because you can fly and fire rockets at people in a settlement battle. That is pretty great. What would I change from the perspective of their economy? Well, I think their economy is in a pretty decent state, absolutely. Wouldn't necessarily change that. I mean, yes, there are better economies in the game, but you have to account for several downsides that those races do have. So the Dark Elves have to deal with slaves, the Greenskins have to deal with the fact they can't trade. So there's always some trade-off somewhere, right? I think Cathay is in a pretty good state from like an economic perspective, overall unit roster perspective. I would love for some more flexibility on the battlefield, especially when it comes to flying units. I would like for perhaps maybe some better version of the Iron Hail Gunners, and maybe a ability to upgrade like Jade Warriors into their final versions, maybe eventually into the Celestial Dragon Guard, as opposed to just removing all the units you've been using in the campaign or using something like the Warband Upgrade mod, which I do have over here, but that's a mod. I feel that kind of functionality should be included in the base game a lot more than it is right now. The one thing Cathay is really missing, from my perspective, is a hero replenishment or some way of increasing replenishment in their campaign. Yes, you have casualty replenishment for yin units, but it's not really great because yin units in Author Resolve and generally in battles are the ones that are going to take less damage. You want casualty replenishment for yang units. Like if this was literally flipped, like yin characters get campaign movement range and yang units get casualty replenishment, Cathay's casualty replenishment problems would not be so much of an issue. That would be one of the things I would do. Another thing that I think Cathay really needs is a new hero type. A melee hero, people have talked about it. Hell, there were even leaks about Creative Assembly making or designing making the art for a melee hero type, the Gate Guard, as it was called, I believe. Getting casualty replenishment, like perhaps something similar to a high-level noble would work. So casualty replenishment, decent melee capability, that would be something that would really, really help Cathay out. Especially if we could get at least one at tier 2, maybe increasing capacity at tier 3. That's what I would really think that Cathay needs. Compass options besides income and casualty replenishment being worth it. A new hero type for casualty replenishment and melee capability. And yeah, some more flexibility on the battlefield. Because yeah, you can use monster units to make that work. But I would say maybe one more unit type. Or just buffing the Onyx Crowmen so they're not complete trash. Or giving us some kind of research to buff them up to increase their armor so they're not worthless trash that doesn't necessarily accomplish much on the battlefield. That's my perspective on it. It's a pretty good race. Like, of all the races that Creative Assembly designed in Warhammer 3, Cathay is the best race. Gotta say, though, one of the things I would like to see is the ability of removing the constant hordes that assault the Bastion. Yes, they aren't as common as they are before, but consider Yuan Bo's campaign. You will still have the Kurgan assaulting the Great Bastion, but especially in Realms of Chaos, but you won't see when they're about to do that. So that ends up being annoying to deal with, so maybe just giving us the ability of removing that entire mechanic altogether would be great. But yeah, I don't really have a lot of complaints about Cathay compared to other races. One final thing I would say, climate suitability needs to be improved. Like Yanbo is in a better position just simply because he can take the jungle as opposed to Xiaoming and Miaoying. But with all the mountains and all the wasteland that's near Cathay and Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos, it means that if you're playing a Cathayan campaign, you basically expand all the way to the mountains of Morn, and then you kind of stop because the settlements that you have will be difficult to build up and very costly to build up and won't give you the same kind of benefit. So I really think like climate suitability would be better. Like one of the main reasons Yanbo is S tier, like compared to Miao Ying Xiaoming, is just because he starts in a jungle. You can take that jungle, and there's sea lanes to Lustria and Cathay itself in Immortal Empire. So having that kind of dynamic change with the climate would improve Cathayan campaigns. Like that's the thing. Like Cathay doesn't have some glaring issues as much as others. They're just some minor things, relatively minor things that they could really use to make their campaigns more enjoyable. That's where I stand on this. Questine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.